My name is Celine, and this is the story of how my life didn't just change once, but twice in ways I never expected. I guess the best place to start is at the beginning. I was born to two loving parents, Merrick and Lisa Merrick, in a small suburban town. My dad worked as a journalist and my mom was a nurse. We weren't wealthy, but life was good, and we were happy. Everything felt pretty normal until the year I turned 14, and that's when my world turned upside down. It was a rainy Tuesday evening, and my parents were on their way home from a dinner party. I stayed behind, spending the night with my grandma, watching some silly cartoons when the phone rang. I'll never forget the cold feeling that crept over me when I heard my grandma's quiet sobs coming from the kitchen. The days that followed were a blur. They told us that my mom had died instantly in the crash. My dad had survived, but just barely. When I finally saw him in the hospital, he was nothing like the strong man I knew. His legs were crushed, and the doctors told us he would never walk again. "Celine," he rasped, reaching out to hold my hand. "I'm so sorry, sweetie. I'm so sorry." At the time, I didn't understand why he was apologizing. The accident wasn't his fault. A drunk driver had run straight into their car. But as I got older, I realized that he was apologizing for everything our lives had become, apologizing for the struggles we would face, for the mother I'd lost, and for the father he thought he couldn't be anymore. My dad, Merrick, though, was stronger than he gave himself credit for. Once he was out of the hospital and settled into his wheelchair, he threw himself back into his work. He had always been a skilled writer, and now he used that talent to become an editor at one of the city's major newspapers. As I grew into my teenage years, Dad made sure I had everything I needed. He encouraged me to make friends, join clubs, and live as normal of a life as possible. But in truth, I preferred spending time with him. We'd watch old movies, debate over books, and he'd even help me with my homework. When it was time for college, Dad insisted that I go away to school. "You need to spread your wings, kiddo," he said with a smile. "Don't worry about me. I'll be just fine." I was hesitant at first, but I knew he was right. So I packed my bags and went off to State University, where I majored in accounting. It was there that I met Jessica, who would soon become my best friend. Through her, I was introduced to her second cousin, Dax. Dax was kind, funny, and didn't even flinch when I told him about my dad's situation. In fact, the first time he met my dad, they instantly clicked, bonding over their love of classic rock. "Your old man's pretty cool," Dax told me after that first meeting. "And you're amazing for taking care of him all these years." I shrugged off the compliment, but inside, I was glowing. For the first time since the accident, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could have a normal life, one with love, laughter, and even a family of my own someday. After graduation, everything seemed to fall into place. I got a job at a local tax service, and Dax found work as a long-haul truck driver. We dated for 2 years before he proposed on a crisp autumn evening in the park where we had our first date. I was over the moon, but there was one thing I needed to be clear about. "Yes, Dax," I said, "but I can't leave my dad. He still needs me." Dax smiled wide and said, "I wouldn't have it any other way. We'll all live together. Your dad's apartment is big enough for the three of us, right?" The wedding was small but beautiful. My dad insisted on wheeling himself down the aisle to give me away, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room. As I stood there, holding Dax's hand, it felt like I was living in a fairy tale. But, like every fairy tale, mine had its villains, and they came in the form of my mother-in-law, Marigold, and my sister-in-law, Callista. From the moment I met them, I could tell they didn't approve of me. During our first meeting, Marigold wrinkled her nose and asked, "So, your father is handicapped?" Trying to keep my cool, I replied, "He's disabled, yes. But he works as an editor." Marigold cut me off, clearly uninterested, saying, "How nice. But, Dax, darling, are you sure about this? There are so many nice girls from good families." Her words stung, and I felt my face burn with anger and shame. Luckily, Dax immediately came to my defense. "Mom, Celine is from a good family. Her dad's disability doesn't change that. I love her, and that's all that matters." That shut Marigold up, but I could still see the disapproval in her eyes. Callista wasn't much better, and after the wedding, she remained just as cold toward me. Despite that, Dax kept his word, and we all moved in with Dad. Our life settled into a comfortable routine. I worked at the tax office. Dax spent days on the road, and when he was home, we'd all have dinner together. But whenever Marigold and Callista visited, the atmosphere in the house shifted. They acted like they owned the place, barely even acknowledging my dad. One day, I overheard Marigold whispering to Callista, "It's such a shame. Dax could have done so much better. Now he's stuck with this girl and her crippled father. Can you imagine what their kids will be like with those genes?" I was furious, but for Dax's sake, I bit my tongue and kept the peace, even though it became harder and harder each time. One evening, after a particularly tense visit from Marigold and Callista, I broke down. Dax found me sobbing in our bedroom. "Hey, what's wrong?" he asked, wrapping his arms around me. "Your mom and sister," I hiccuped. "They hate me. They think I'm not good enough because of Dad." Dax's face hardened. "That's ridiculous," he said firmly. "You and your dad are my family now. If they can't accept that, then that's their problem, not ours." His words comforted me, but deep down, I knew this was only the beginning of the trouble with Marigold and Callista. As time passed, Dax's trucking business began to take off, and he was on the road more than ever. I missed him when he was gone, but I kept busy with work and spending time with Dad. One autumn evening, while helping Dad get ready for bed, Dax called with a burst of excitement. "Celine," he said, "how would you feel about buying a townhouse?" Marigold's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered, crossing her arms defiantly. "This house isn't yours, Celine. Dax worked for it, and now that he's gone, it should go to his family." I took a deep breath, trying to calm the shaking in my hands. Dax was my family, and so is my father. This house is legally mine. You have no right to be here. Callista scoffed, throwing a glance at Marigold. "We're just trying to help, Celine. You're not in any position to handle this house, especially with that crippled father of yours." Hearing them refer to my dad in such a callous way snapped something inside me. I moved closer, standing inches away from Marigold. "You're not helping. You're trespassing. Get out before I call the police." Marigold's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might actually challenge me. But then she threw her hands up dramatically.
"Fine.
But don't think this is over. We'll be back, Celine. Mark my words." Callista followed her mother, shooting me a disgusted look as they stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind them. The silence that followed was deafening. My heart was pounding in my ears, and I realized I had been holding my breath. Dad rolled up beside me, his expression filled with concern. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" I turned to him, my eyes filling with tears as the weight of everything finally came crashing down. "No, Dad. I'm not all right, but I'll be okay. We'll be okay." He reached out, squeezing my hand. "We'll get through this. Together." I nodded, wiping away the tears and looking around the house. It didn't matter what Marigold and Callista thought. They couldn't take away what Dax and I had built together. This house, these memories, they were ours. And I wasn't going to let anyone take them away from me. That night, as I lay in bed, exhausted from the emotional toll of the day, I knew I had a long road ahead. Grief, loss, and the constant threat of Marigold and Callista trying to tear down everything I held dear. But with Dad by my side and the memory of Dax's love guiding me, I knew I had the strength to face whatever came next. This was my life now, and I would fight for it. One afternoon, while sorting through Dax's desk, I came across a small, weathered notebook tucked in the back of a drawer. It was filled with familiar handwriting, Dax's. Flipping through the pages, I realized it was a collection of notes, thoughts, and messages he had written to himself over the years. Some pages were filled with plans for the future, road trips he wanted to take with me, gardening ideas he had for Dad, even little reminders to fix the leaky faucet in the kitchen. But then, towards the back, the entries became more serious, almost reflective. One note, written in bold letters, caught my attention. "Protect Celine and Merrick." Beneath it, he had jotted down a list of things he had done to ensure our safety, creating the will, updating the insurance policy, and paying off debts. It was clear that he had been preparing for the possibility of leaving us, even if he had never mentioned it to me. I felt a lump form in my throat as I realized how much Dax had thought ahead, how much he had worried about us. He had never been one to talk about his fears, but here they were, laid bare in ink. In a way, it was like getting to know a different side of him, a side that had quietly carried the weight of responsibility without ever letting me see. At the very end of the notebook was a final entry, written just a few weeks before his accident. I hope Celine never has to read this. But if she does, I know she'll be okay. She's stronger than she thinks. Tears welled up in my eyes, but this time they weren't just tears of grief. They were tears of gratitude, of love, and of the unshakable bond that Dax and I had shared. Even though he was gone, I could feel his presence with me, guiding me, protecting me, and reminding me that I was never truly alone. Closing the notebook, I placed it gently back in the drawer, a sense of peace washing over me. Dax had done everything he could to make sure we were taken care of, and now it was up to me to honor that. I would live my life fully for both of us. As the days went on, I continued settling into our new normal. Dad and I spent more time together, finding comfort in our shared grief and slowly rediscovering the joy in everyday moments, whether it was working in the garden or watching a favorite TV show. The house no longer felt empty. It felt like a place of love and memories, a sanctuary where Dax's spirit still lingered. Marigold and Callista never returned after that final confrontation. Whatever fight they had left in them seemed to evaporate the moment they realized they had no claim to our life. I didn't expect them to apologize or acknowledge the hurt they had caused, but that didn't matter anymore. I had my family, my home, and my peace. That was all I needed. Life wasn't the same without Dax, but as time passed, I learned to carry the weight of his absence with grace. I found strength in the love we had shared and in the future we had planned together, even if I had to live it without him. And in the quiet moments, when the house was still and the world felt distant, I could still hear his voice in my heart, whispering the same words he had written in his notebook. "You're stronger than you think." And I knew he was right. As Marigold and Callista's car disappeared down the street, I stood on the porch for a moment, taking in the quiet. The garden rustled gently in the wind, and I felt a profound sense of relief settle over me. For the first time since Dax's death, I truly believed that everything was going to be all right. I glanced down at my belly, cradling it protectively. This baby, Dax's baby, was a gift, a piece of him that would live on. Marigold's venomous words didn't matter. She couldn't touch the love I carried within me, both for Dax and for the new life growing inside me. I walked back inside the house where Dad was waiting, his warm smile meeting me at the door. "Everything okay out there?" he asked, his tone gentle but knowing. I nodded, returning his smile. "Yeah, everything's fine now." Dad pulled me into a hug, and for a moment, we stood there in the soft light of the afternoon, just the two of us. But not really just the two of us anymore. There was a future inside me, a future that Dax had left behind, and as long as I had that, I knew I could face whatever came our way. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into preparing for the baby. Dad helped me set up the nursery, painting the walls a soft, calming shade of blue. We spent hours picking out furniture, baby clothes, and all the little things that would make this house a home for our child. It was a bittersweet process. Every tiny onesie, every soft blanket reminded me of the life Dax and I had dreamed of sharing together. But now, those dreams were mine to carry forward, and I was determined to honor them. As the days passed, I found strength I never knew I had. With each kick and flutter from my growing baby, I felt closer to Dax, like he was still with me, guiding me. And Dad, my rock, was always by my side, offering support and encouragement whenever I needed it. One afternoon, as we were organizing baby clothes, Dad turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "Dax would be so proud of you, Celine. The way you're handling everything, the way you're taking care of this baby, you're doing an incredible job." Tears pricked at my eyes, but this time, they were tears of gratitude. "Thanks, Dad," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I just want to make sure this baby knows how much Dax loved them, even before they were born. Dad smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. And they will. You're already making sure of that. As the due date approached, my anticipation grew. I felt more and more ready to meet this little piece of Dax, to hold them in my arms and tell them about the wonderful man their father had been. There were still moments of grief, moments when the weight of Dax's absence felt almost unbearable. But those moments were fewer now, and they were always followed by a sense of hope, a hope that had been reignited by the life growing inside me. When the day finally came, it was both the hardest and the most beautiful moment of my life. Dad was with me every step of the way, his calming presence helping me through the pain. And then, after what felt like an eternity, my baby was placed in my arms, a beautiful, healthy little boy. Tears streamed down my face as I held him, his tiny fingers wrapping around mine. "Hi, little one," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm your mom. And your dad. He would have loved you so much." Dad stood beside me, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "What are you going to name him?" he asked softly. I looked down at my son, feeling the weight of the decision. And then it came to me, as if Dax himself was whispering the name in my ear. "His name is Dax," I said, my voice steady. "Dax Merrick Thompson." Dad smiled, his eyes filled with pride. A perfect name for a perfect little boy. As I held my son close, I felt a deep sense of peace. Dax may have been gone, but his love was still here, living on in our son, in the home we had built together, and in the future we had dreamed of. And I knew, without a doubt, that everything was going to be okay.